I've recently read the political essay On Liberty by John Stewart Mill, and I found it incredibly interesting. I have always considered myself to value democracy above all else. But one day I was taking an online politics quiz, and there were two very thought-provoking questions. The first was, do you think democracy should decide all laws? And I clicked yes. And then the second question was, if you clicked yes, imagine this. A democratic country that is predominantly Muslim votes to kill the Jewish minority within its borders. Do you still think democracy should decide all laws? The question made me stop and think, and I soon thought of more examples that came with a similar problem, like a vote from a pragmatist majority to kill all disabled people, or a vote by a group of friends to make one of their number give the rest of their number all of the money in their wallet. It then went that I, who'd already insisted on democracy, thinking it to be basically supreme as a system, questioning whether it was an effective way of governing at all. This is very much the tone of Mill's On Liberty, as he takes the view, as I do, that a democratic government is better than a hereditary ruler or a dictator, but even that cannot decide everything. Mill argues in favour of freedom of the individual, or liberty. He sets out in the early stages of the book what the two main enemies of individual liberty are. The first is fairly simple. It's the tyranny of a king or dictator. This is someone in position of authority forcing the individuals within a society to do their bidding. Imagine if the Queen announced tomorrow that all Britons were to become her slaves and spend their spare time building giant statues of her corgis. This would be a clear abuse of individual freedom. In the words of Mill himself, they consisted of a governing one, or a governing tribe or castle, who derived their authority from inheritance or conquest, who, at all events, did not hold it at the pleasure of the governed. By this Mill means that the people who were being governed by this authority had no say in the matter, nor did they have a say in who got to exercise that authority. The second type of tyranny is much more complex. Mill describes it as the tyranny of the majority, and this is the kind of authority the question about the Muslim democracy and the Jewish minority is referring to. There was a belief at the time that democratic countries did not need individual liberty, as their power came from the people they ruled over. And after all, how can the people commit tyranny against themselves? However, Mill argues that a democratic society can abuse the liberty of the individual just as much as a king if an individual is in any way different to the majority of society, does something the majority of society frowns upon, or holds an unpopular point of view. Mill argues, for example, that simply because a view is unpopular does not make it wrong, and later in the essay he references Spain, a country which, since the Reconquista, has been historically fanatically Christian, and has killed atheists because they viewed atheist beliefs to be wrong and immoral. This is a good example of why we shouldn't censor unpopular opinions or persecute people who hold them, as society may just be preventing a correct opinion from being given the proper consideration. If you imagine freedom as a bald eagle, imagine it being chased on one side by a giant Tyrannosaurus Rex, representing the tyranny of a king, and on the other side by a pack of wolves, representing the tyranny of the majority. Mill believes that the only way to protect the eagle of liberty from these two foes who would rip it to shreds is to give it the protection of individual rights, which act like a big shiny magical force shield around the eagle of liberty, protecting it from all harm. Speaking of harm, Mill believed that there must be authority in society for society to function. For example, there had to be an army to protect from invaders, and therefore there had to be taxes to pay for that army. And there needed to be a police force and courts to prosecute people who break the law. So the obvious question is, when is it okay to use force to intervene in the individual's affairs? In other words, when can the government use its power, normally in the form of a police force, to stop someone doing something? Well, Mill said that the state should operate on the harm principle, so the state should only step in on the individual's liberty when their actions will harm others. For example, I have freedom, but I do not have the freedom to kill one of my co-workers, as I will be doing them harm. And in that situation, it's perfectly reasonable action to use the state's power to arrest and put me on trial. Mill also says that the state does not have to wait until a crime is committed, and if an individual plans or attempts to do another harm, then they can arrest them to stop that harm from happening. This does, however, give me a lot of freedom. For example, the government could not, under the harm principle, stop me from practicing any religion I choose to, stop me from reading any book I wanted to, or consuming any level of alcohol I wished to, as I would not be doing harm in any of those situations to any other person. It's worth stating also that Mill specifically says in On Liberty that offence does not count as harm, so a Christian could not claim that my t-shirt which states "God is dead and we have killed him" offends them and have the government take that Christian seriously. So in other words, according to Mill, my free speech trumps your safe space, which is one of the reasons why I like On Liberty so much. Finally, on the question of taxes, Mill does say that it's perfectly justified for a democratically elected government to take taxes from people within a society in order to fund common works. By common works, he basically means the army, and he does say in the essay that he actively opposes state-run schools. He also says in the essay that it is wrong for a government to try and use alcohol taxes to encourage people to drink less, as he regards this as what we would basically call today a nanny state. He does say, however, that if a state needs additional funds, it may be more sensible to raise alcohol tax rather than other taxes, as alcohol is not necessary, whereas food is. So in a way, he favours a raise to alcohol taxes rather than a raise to income tax, but not to get people to drink less, just to raise revenue for the government without affecting people's ability to buy food and other basic needs. In conclusion, I'd give On Liberty 4 out of 5 stars, because it raises lots of interesting questions about society and the individual's role within it. It is also amazingly relevant, especially considering its age. It is one of the most thought-provoking books I've ever read. On the other hand, though I would definitely recommend you read On Liberty if you like politics or philosophy, it's very rambly in parts. The book is also quite dry, and I suspect someone who's not accustomed to reading longer books would find it quite tiresome. This is why I only gave it 4 stars and not 5. But I would say, if you do have the patience to get through it, the ideas argued for are incredibly interesting, and the consumption of those ideas will certainly be a rewarding experience. Thanks for watching, and as always, you may disagree with what I have to say, but you cannot deny me my right to say it. Now, of course, you also can have your say on the ideas discussed, and I'd implore you to do so down in the comments.